Every time I do one of these videos where I talk about using an older device in the modern day, there's kind of always the caveat of, yes, you can, but it feels like it's older, it's no longer supported, and it just doesn't feel like a modern product. But for better and for worse, the iPhone X does not feel like an older product, but it does still have the caveat of the fact that it's no longer supported. So in 2025, what is it like to use an iPhone X, and what does it really mean for smartphones overall when you consider the fact that this doesn't feel like it has aged a single day? Back when the iPhone X was originally introduced in 2017, it was introduced behind the "One More Thing" moniker. Those are hallowed words for iPhone users.
We do have one more thing.
But it was introduced alongside the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus, which, aside from the SE lineups, the 8 and 8 Plus were the last flagship iPhones to get the home button treatment. After that, it was all gesture-based, all full-screen design, all the time. But the iPhone X was the first for that and many things. Not the first on Android. I know Android had had a lot of things before it, but it was the first for iPhones, which was still a pretty big deal.
Clearly not first, but still nice. It doesn't have to be first to be nice.
It was the first iPhone to completely ditch the home button in favor of Face ID instead of Touch ID and gestures for navigation instead of the home button. It was also the first iPhone to use an OLED display instead of the IPS LCDs that they had been using previously. It wasn't the first iPhone, however, to use glass on the front and back with stainless steel in the middle. However, it was the first to utilize this glass on the back for wireless charging, and they also polished the edges and made them round instead of flat, because the iPhone 4Ss were bead blasted and flat. This iPhone also caught a lot of flack for many reasons, one of which being the camera bump and the other being the, well, front camera bump, also known as the notch. Granted, every time there's change on any iPhones, or really any smartphones, but iPhones in particular, there's always some sort of controversy, there's always some sort of hesitation, but as the time has gone on, we've seen that really this was kind of the way that Apple was going to go no matter what, and you were either going to get used to it or get over it. Of course, nowadays the iPhone X is unfortunately no longer supported. They stopped supporting it back with iOS 16, and it really is a shame because this thing feels very, very capable on its last update, and the feel in the hand, it feels brand new. Interestingly, this one actually feels brand new in both the overall design, which we'll talk about why that's probably not a good thing for the phone industry in general, but it also just feels brand new, like it was not abused in any way, beaten up, dropped, although the screen was broken and that was replaced. But regardless, this thing design-wise has aged so well, and I just realized that I'm like flashing the camera with light, and I'm sorry about that. Looking at the OLED display, this thing looks like what you'd expect from any OLED display from a modern phone. It just pops. The colors are great. It even gets decent brightness outdoors. Funnily enough, this iPhone, because of the full screen design, was the first time that I went down in size physically for an iPhone when I bought mine, but technically went up in screen size. See, with the iPhone Plus models up before the iPhone X, so 7 Plus, 6 Plus, 8 Plus, those all had 5.5-inch displays, which for the time felt massive, especially considering we were going from 4-inch displays with the iPhone 5s up to 5.5-inch displays with the Plus models. But even though this phone was physically smaller than those plus-size phones, it had a 5.8-inch screen. And frankly, the colors on the OLED displays were always going to be superior to the IPS displays, and even today, they hold up just fine. Something else that has held up really well is the camera system. So this is not a big 3-camera monster like what we have on newer iPhones nowadays. This is a 2-camera setup, and funnily enough, this is the kind of setup that Apple actually went back to with the current iPhone 16 lineup, but well, they already had it back with the iPhone X. 2 cameras right next to one another, and they're capable of 4K at 30 or 60 FPS. Unfortunately, though, this is well before we got 4K on the front-facing cameras for iPhones, so you're stuck with HD, but you can go from 30 to 60 FPS on the front-facing camera, and if you're weird, you can bump it down to 720p. But you don't get 24 FPS on the front-facing sensor, which is kind of odd, but regardless, no 4K, but 30 and 60 FPS. Kind of nice for the time. So yeah, while the front cameras are a bit of a letdown with no 4K, because well, this is well before 4K on front-facing cameras, the back cameras, like I said, are capable of 4K, and something that Apple did all the way back with the iPhone 7s when they first introduced 2 cameras on the Plus model was color matching for these cameras. You can zoom in and out on these 2 cameras, which you have no ultra wide, just standard wide and telephoto, and you can kind of see the transition, but it's kind of difficult to actually notice any color differences. Things like portrait mode are okay. You don't get any sort of real-time preview of portrait mode like you do on newer smartphones. You just kind of have to take the photo and hope that it gets it right, and if it doesn't, try it again. You never realize how much you actually take that pre-run bokeh for granted until it's not there anymore. But it does at least have portrait mode. Granted, we had that all the way back with the iPhone 7s. Moving back around to the front of the phone though, the Face ID function of this phone was pretty ahead of its time and also really controversial when it first came out. When it was first introduced on stage with Craig Federighi, the original demo phone failed. They originally blamed it on the fact that too many people looked at it, and so he only got one attempt at the swipe before it went into passcode mode. But people knew, and I'm 100% sure Craig Federighi knew, that it was a high-stakes demo to show how secure Face ID could be, and the fact that the first shot at it failed, well, it sparked some articles.
You know, let's try that again. Ho, ho, ho. Let's go to backup here.
Regardless though, aside from some dedicated holdoffs who just hate the idea of a phone taking pictures of your face, which it doesn't, by the way, it scans your face, pretty much every iPhone nowadays uses Face ID, except of course for the SEs, but refer to my previous comment about the dedicated holdouts. Now, to be fair, do I still wish that the iPhones had some sort of fingerprint reader under the screen? Absolutely. Touch ID is faster in most cases, and in fact with the iPhone Xs there was a point where Apple improved the speed of Face ID through hardware on, I think it was the 11 or the 12, but anytime I use Touch ID with the lock button on my iPad mini or with the underscreen fingerprint reader of my Pixel 6 Pro, I am just constantly reminded of how much faster it is. But again, it's not so much faster that I feel like Face ID is an inconvenience. So far in this video, the design hasn't aged a day, the screen hasn't aged a day, Face ID is pretty much just the standard for every iPhone now, so it really hasn't aged. If anything, it's gotten better, and the cameras are still really, really good, not even for their age, just in general for a smartphone. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention the gestures. So the gestures on this thing were, at the time, something a lot of people said was a big learning curve. And I could see how it could be a learning curve for people coming from the home buttons, but nowadays, it is just commonplace on smartphones. Funnily enough, I was actually kind of skeptical of the gestures that had originally come out first on Android. Anytime I would use an Android, I would use the 3-button navigation because gestures were just so stiff and janky that when Apple said they were going to be going with gestures, I was extremely hesitant because I saw what Android did and I didn't know if Apple could go any better. But fortunately they did, and well, once Android, I'm going to say it, copied the fluidity of the iPhone's movements, gestures, all of it, it was finally good on Android as well. So gestures, it's not even a question. It's not that they've aged or that they haven't aged. They are still in use and really haven't changed much on the iPhone side since their introduction right here. But something that this phone has that actually is better than what we have today is 3D Touch. This is one of the last iPhones to have 3D Touch, and I forgot how nice it was to have. Nowadays, if you want to use any sort of 3D Touch enabled function, it's just a press and hold. But back introduced with the iPhone 6, or I think it was the 6S, it was a pressure sensitive display function. So you were able to actually press in on the screen, 3D press, and you could activate functions. And nowadays, when you go to access those functions on this phone, it is so much faster because instead of pressing and holding for a period of time, you just press harder and it does it right away. I actually really miss that. Like, I mean, look at this. I can press and kind of press, and boom, there we go. Flashlight and then press, boom. That is such a nice feature, and I really wish that Apple would have kept it, but Whether it was cost or some other reason, they just got rid of it. Now, something that I did expect to age with this phone, and to be fair, it did, was the performance. It's not terrible, but if you go by Geekbench scores, it's definitely not the fastest. This is an A11 Bionic chip, and it gets somewhere around 1,900 points in Geekbench 6. Compared to something like the Google Pixel 6 Pro, this thing is getting about 2,800 points versus 1,900. However, the single core performance on this thing has actually held up extremely well. The single core performance for the A11 Bionic is slightly over 1,000 points, which is pretty impressive and right on par with the Google Pixel 6 Pro's chip. And I know I keep comparing it to the Pixel 6 Pro, but that's kind of the only Android phone that I have that I can test directly. But if we actually compare this to a smartphone from the Android side of things of this phone's day, it gets even more wild. Looking at a smartphone from 2017, the year that this came out, something like the Galaxy S8 was getting a much worse single core score compared to the iPhone. This iPhone, again, was getting a little over 1,000 points on a single core Geekbench run, whereas the Galaxy S8, same era as this phone, was getting about 300, maybe 400 points on single core. And multi-core was a lot closer, but you have to keep in mind the Galaxy was running an octa-core processor. And this is back when iPhones were still only using 6-core processors, and Android users were shaming iPhones for having 2 less cores than their flagships, but those 6 cores were putting in the work. All of that together, I just took a screenshot, all of that together is why this phone, in terms of performance, has aged, but not as much as you would think. I think the biggest thing letting this phone down in terms of performance isn't the CPU, it's not even the GPU, this thing still runs super quick in games. It's the actual RAM limit. This thing only has 3 gigabytes of RAM, and nowadays even iPhones have 8 gigabytes of RAM, and a lot of phones have more than that. And so, I mean, I guess RAM optimization is just kind of out the window with newer phones having so much memory. So you load up a couple web pages and you go back to the first one and it's got to reload that page. That's just a common occurrence on this that was really not a common occurrence on any modern smartphone. So yes, performance has definitely aged. Not as much as you would think, especially considering that phones from 2021 are actually getting similar single core scores, but that doesn't make up for the fact that it's no longer supported, and what you can do with it still runs up on some limitations because of RAM. And I really didn't run into any that were limited by CPU or GPU, but either way, it is still less powerful than what most people would expect in 2025. And the last thing is the battery. This is kind of less of a worry for a lot of people because batteries are replaceable, but this, along with the design, are two things that kind of started to spell the not great parts of modern smartphones. And yes, it kind of started here, but Apple had been doing it a little longer than others. The batteries on these things were kind of okay in their day, and obviously they've aged, so it's best if you pick one of these up for 2025 use to replace the batteries. And fortunately, this is not from the era where Apple began to serialize their batteries and force you to basically code them to the phone, but I mentioned earlier that this phone was dropped on its face and broke the screen. There is a serialized part in this, and yes, I'm glossing over the batteries because the battery's fine, it was fine, it is fine, you can replace it and make it fine again, but what isn't fine is the serialized displays. This phone had its screen replaced, I don't know how long ago. My sister-in-law just said it was broken and got replaced, and now Face ID doesn't work. And Face ID doesn't work because it was replaced at a third-party repair center and they didn't have the proper tools to reconfigure Face ID. This iPhone, in a lot of ways, started to spell the bad side of Apple more publicly, especially when it comes to right to repair, because before that, these designs, sure, look just years apart from one another, even millennia apart from one another, depending on how dramatic you want to be. But this is still more repairable than this, because Touch ID is a pain in the butt to remove the adhesive from the ribbon cable that's attached to the display, but you can do it, and you can swap it over and still have Touch ID after replacing a screen. Face ID, however, not so much. Now, as the years have gone on, you are now able to, with some third-party tools, get Face ID working again on this, and I might try that at some point, but the fact that this is kind of where that serialized set of components started to really show its ugly head and prove that Apple was not in this for right to repair, but in this for cost of repair, for profit, that is a big downside for these phones, especially if you're buying one secondhand and you want to use it in 2025, and there's the possibility that this display has been replaced and not properly. But that takes me to the second and last bad thing about this phone in 2025. If you want to take away from this video that, sure, you can use this phone in 2025, it doesn't get the latest software, but it does still get some security updates, and just swap the battery and make sure the screen hasn't been broken, then you can take that away from this video. But there's a bigger story to be told with this design and where things are with the current state of smartphones, with a few exceptions. The iPhone X was the first iPhone to go with a full front screen design, the first one to go with an AMOLED, the first one to go with stainless steel on the side, glass on the front and back, as well as dual cameras, spaced out with a flash in the middle, wireless charging, all of these things. But how many phones nowadays don't fit that description? As dated as the designs for the iPhone 6 through 8 look, and even the SE, they were still unique, and they're unique now more than ever because we've moved away from these big bezels, home button, and a little screen in the middle, and every phone fits the description of a full front display with minimal bezels, glass on the front and back, metal in the middle. They're all candy bar style phones that look the same, with the exception of foldables, and I'm thinking I'm going to pick one up that is older, but also still a foldable. And make sure you subscribe so you don't miss that. But these designs nowadays for the iPhone 6 and up to the end of this design era with the SE3, they're just unique now instead of old, but also old. I don't know where I'm going with this. The point is, the iPhones looked different from the rest of the competition for so long. Android, as much as I like to give them crap about telling iPhone users they're not first, Android was first to adopt the large full front display with the hole punch cutout or the teardrop or the notch, glass on the front and back, wireless charging. They adopted all of these things first, and then the iPhone, well, the iPhone did it, and they were kind of the last holdouts of the flagships to finally go with this design, and it's just been that way ever since. When it comes to using an iPhone in 2025, it makes this video kind of weird because when I've done videos in the past about using this product in this year, there's always this overhanging sense of, yes, you can, but I wouldn't recommend it, or in extreme cases, no, you cannot, it is definitely past its time. See my 1999 iBook video. But with the iPhone X, I don't recommend using it in 2025 because I'm more of a security updates guy and I prefer to have the latest version of whatever software the phone can run. But if you're okay with using iOS 16 with whatever security updates keep coming to it, and you aren't really a really heavy power user, you could technically use this in 2025. And if you do, the deals on these things are really good, especially considering that they're no longer supported, because as soon as that happens, prices plummet. I mean, even on Amazon, which is not the best place to find one of these, you can pick one up for $180, which is right in line with a lot of budget phones that are way, way worse of an experience than this thing. So yeah, using an iPhone X in 2025. Can you do it? Yes. Should you? It's your call. It's kind of a personal decision thing. I think that the fact that this hasn't aged speaks really well to the design of this phone, and I'm flashing you with the light on the back of this again, I'm sorry. But the fact that the design of this phone hasn't really aged speaks not just to the fact that Apple really did adopt this at a good time and then continue with it because, well, obviously it's their new design language, but it also speaks to the fact that we have kind of hit a plateau with candy bar smartphones. Sure, you can make them thinner, you can make them flashier, give them fancy colors, use different materials, but unless you're going with something like a foldable, these are all kind of going to look the same. And at the end of the day, if you're going to hold on to a phone and lightly use it for a long time, you could pick one of these up and be just fine. Either way, that's been it. This is obviously not my normal setup. I'm still in Taiwan. I am trying to post videos when I can. I'm doing shorts when I can. There's just a lot going on right now. If you missed it, I'm a dad, so I've got that going on right now. Just tons of stuff that I'm keeping track of, managing time-wise, and I've also got to figure out all this other stuff for moving here, so I really appreciate your patience. If you do enjoy these videos, definitely leave a like. Maybe subscribe if you don't want to miss content like this, because it is going to be a little sporadic here and there. I've got some plans coming up soon, but either way, that's been it. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next video. And check out my shorts. I have those, not the shorts I'm wearing, but the short videos. Check those out when you get the chance, and aside from that, I will see you all in the next video. Thank you so much for being here, and have a good one.